My name is Ed Brink. I'm the Division Manager of Training and Technical Support for Meier Supply Company. We want to take a minute here to talk about how to check a vent pressure safety switch. There's a lot of ways that guys troubleshoot vent pressure safety switches that will get them into trouble. One would be jumping the switch out if it's not making, because that could create a backdraft through the furnace. Two is blowing or sucking on the switch to see if it clicks, which is a bad idea because it's going to affect the diaphragm of the pressure switch, which will ultimately make it incorrect. What we like to do is go over a couple things with our root furnaces. First and foremost, our root furnaces are a sealed combustion system. That means with the door on, that combustion area is sealed. We're going to bring fresh air in from our air intake, and we're going to exhaust air out through the exhaust pipe. So first and foremost, when we're troubleshooting systems, we want to make sure that we seal the combustion section back up, and we'll talk about that in a second. So this particular furnace is locked out on a vent pressure switch fault. So what we want to do to troubleshoot the fault is we want to go through and we want to fire up the furnace. In this particular case, we're going to turn it on heat. We're going to drive the heat up, and we're going to wait for it to kick on. You can see with this particular fault that we'll go through the pre-ignition process where the draft inducer motor will kick on. The vent pressure switch can't make, so you'll never hear spark, and the unit is going to fault out. Once that happens, it's really common practice for guys to go to the next step, which would be to shut the power off and remove the burner door to see what's going on inside there. Once they do that, they'll fire the system back up, give it a call for heat, go through the process again. In this particular case, with the door off, we're going to get combustion. We're going to get good vent pressure reading. The switch is going to close. We're going to go through the process of combustion. So there might be a general knowledge or theory that there is a problem with the air intake, but there could also be a switch problem. So we need to identify is a problem with the switch or with the air intake. So once the unit fires up and runs normally, we know that at least everything else in the system is correct. Now we can have two things that will cause us to have venting issues. And you can see this furnace took off. But if we put the door back on, the flame extinguishes and goes out. So we want to go ahead and check the vent pressure safety switch. We're going to shut the door off, and we want to pop out one of the plugs on the side of the furnace. With the plug out, I want to take two pieces of tubing from my dual port manometer and run them through that hole. One tube is going to be a reference because, again, we're sealed combustion with the door on. We want to have an atmospheric reference to the burner. We're just going to leave one lying in here. The other one, we're going to install a T on and a small piece of tubing. We're going to disconnect the tubing from the draft inducer motor, plug our T in, and reconnect the tubing from our switch to that T port. Now, most guys will get to this point here, put the door back on, and do the test. So let's do what will normally get done in the field. So with our tubing on, we'll take our dual port manometer, get the tubes connected, power it up, and we'll check our draft. Our switch reads negative 0.8 inches, which means that our draft has to get to 0.9 inches, negative 0.9 inches, in order for the switch to close. As you can see here, we've got 1.93, which we're well above, or we have way more vacuum than what we need for that switch to close. The unit's going to fire up and take off. So in most cases, guys will just stop here and say that they have a bad problem with the switch. But remember, we're sealed combustion, and in order for us to get our tubing into this unit to do our testing, we had to pop off the access panel. With this hole inside the furnace, we're going to get inaccurate readings. So you could take a rag or take a plug that came out of the furnace, drill two holes through it, fish your tubing through that hole. But as you can see over here, as we start to knock off or block off the air intake, where the tubes come through, my vent pressure went down to negative 0.26. The furnace shut off, and it's going to go and throw a fault code. So with this particular furnace, we have a problem with the air intake, and that's noted by being able to check the vent pressure safety switch. With the door off, we have great vent pressure, the furnace runs fine. When we do our vent pressure test and we don't seal off the hole, we get a false reading. As I start to block off that hole and make that unit a sealed combustion again, my vent pressure is going to drop and my furnace is going to shut off. So to effectively troubleshoot a furnace and effectively troubleshoot the vent pressure safety switch, you need to put your manometer in series with the port of the draft inducer motor. You need to put a reference tube into the furnace. You need to put the blower door back on. You need to seal up the holes on the side of the furnace and then run the system. Verifying the vent pressure and verifying the setting of the switch will tell me whether or not my motor is creating enough draft. If I have enough draft created by the motor and the switch doesn't close, the switch is bad. If I don't create enough vent pressure, then the switch is doing its job, and I need to look into the reasons why that is. Do I have a restricted air intake? Do I have a restricted exhaust? Again, one of the easiest ways to verify a restricted air intake would be to remove the blower door, remove any obstructions on the air intake. If the furnace starts and fires and continues to run, most likely it's an air intake problem. We can verify that by putting the door on. And if we put the door on and the vent pressure drops and the burner shuts off, we verified that we have an air intake problem. If we think we have an exhaust problem, one of the things that we can do is remove the coupling from the furnace draft inducer motor, remove the exhaust pipe from the system, fire the unit back up, wait for ignition, and verify vent pressure. If the vent pressure is normal with the exhaust pipe removed, then that tells us we have a restriction on our exhaust pipe. So that covers the basics of understanding and effectively checking the vent pressure safety switch using a dual port manometer. If you have any other questions, please contact your local branch. Thank you.